Today's video is about the rocks in this tank. It's a bit of a long story, but first of all, I got the rocks from a local landscaping supply company in my town, and I got it for 10 cents a pound. It's called Rundle Stone, and it's from a town in Canmore in Canada, near where I'm from. And the reason why I got it for so cheap at 10 cents a pound is because they have an area where they have giant frickin' like 500 to 2,000 pound boulders. And those are 10 cents a pound. Well, I went over there and I found these chunks in that pile, and I literally grabbed the big 100-pound chunks and put them in the trunk of my car. And I got them from that pile, so they charged me 10 cents a pound. This stone, this flat one right here, I picked up on its own. So my first tip is, if you're getting rock, do not get it from the fish store if you can avoid it, because their markup is unbelievable. Second, go to a landscape supply company and look around, be creative with the price, try to get it from the cheapest section possible. I then took it home, and some of the pieces were just unbelievably big. So I took my sledgehammer and I broke them up into the smaller pieces you see that I have now. Then I had to set up my tank because I have gigantic rocks in. This is a 6'1" 140, and this flat stone, I think it weighs between 80 and 100 pounds. I can barely get it out with two hands. So the other thing about this Rundle Stone that is really sketchy is how jaded it is. When you break it, it makes pretty fine edges that can be pretty sketchy for fish and for glass. What I ended up doing was using a hammer. I tried to knock off a lot of the sharp edges and stuff to try to limit the risk to the fish. But the reality is that this piece here that's perched, if it fell forward towards the camera, this tank would be done. So you do create a huge amount of risk having large, heavy rocks, and especially if you start stacking them up like this one. One thing I do to my tanks to mitigate some of the risk is I load them up with foam. And I'll show you what I do on the bottom of the tank right here. So the bottom of my tank is covered in foam completely. It's 1/2-inch foam I got from Home Depot. And before I put water in, because it's so buoyant, I cut the foam perfectly. I put it in the bottom. Then I added the sand. And the weight of the sand keeps the foam on the bottom of the tank. Lots of guys use different things to protect the bottom glass, but this stuff was so cheap. It was $5 at Home Depot, way cheaper than the fluorescent lighting diffuser that some people have. The other thing I do is I support the entire bottom of the tank with foam. This is 3/4 inch, and because this tank is so heavy, it's actually compressed it, but on the inside of the tank where you don't have the border, it's full. The glass is fully supported from the bottom, and then the glass is also protected by the foam that I showed you on the inside. So what does that mean? It means that if I accidentally drop one of these rocks, first of all, the sand is going to help distribute the weight. Then the rock is going to hit the foam, and the foam helps take maybe some of the points and make it not act like a point, but spread the surface area and the pressure, and then it distributes the load a bit more. And then the third thing I have is this foam on the bottom, which also helps carry the load so that the glass isn't floating in the air. Because if this piece of foam wasn't here, the tank would be sitting on this edge, and then that edge comes up and your glass is floating. And that's a lot of the reason why most people's tanks break when they drop their rocks. And then the last piece of this system is the 3/4 inch plywood. A lot of guys, when they build their tank stands out of wood, they don't sheet the top with plywood. I do if I'm going to be loading the tank with gigantic rocks. And I have this beautifully, totally joking diagram to demonstrate why. So if you accidentally drop a giant rock here, and this load boom comes down, like I said, I have the 1/2 inch foam, the actual glass, and then the foam under the tank picks up the glass, and then the plywood picks that up, and all that is to prevent the glass from deflecting or bending under the weight of the rock. Some guys don't do the plywood, and so if you do drop something and you drop it in an area where it's not picked up by the studs on the frame that you've made out of wood, the glass will still bend because the plywood, or the lack of plywood, the foam bends, and you can still smash your glass. But this way with the plywood, it is continuously supported, and the foam helps transfer that load uniformly across the bottom of your tank. So I try to keep the rocks away from the glass. I don't bring the rocks right up to the front. I try to keep them back a couple of inches, 3 to 4 inches, just to give myself a little bit of a buffer. But in reality, I am super careful when I'm moving these, and I try really hard not to drop or move anything. The last tip I'll give you is I have this open area here, and when I vacuum out the gravel, I literally take the rock carefully and I set it to the side, and then I slide this one to the side, and I move everything very methodically while I'm siphoning, and I do not pile the rocks up, because the second you pile one up, it gets unstable and falls, you'll destroy your tank. So I hope that gives you guys a few tips on how to add rocks and try to make your tanks look really cool. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them. I try to respond to everybody. Thanks so much for watching, and have yourselves a great day.